I appreciate all of you coming in today for I'm not going to say hearing per se, but this informational session we're having today. The forestry industry being our number 2 commodity in the state, and I just feel like it's very important that we have some discussions on what's going on here, and what's best for our landowners, our timber growers, and our mills in the state of Mississippi. It's not easy. Nothing we're talking about today is going to be easy. Nothing in here is going to be simple. And I'm going to be sure, and I want to say that up front. From the experts I've talked to along the way, we've even been called to say that maybe some of this is a little more cutting edge than we thought when we first discussed it. Originally, this was going to be a discussion about our markets, about the European Union's deforestation regulations, and about the location of and discussions about the timber sequestration. I don't think we're going to make it to the carbon sequestration. I don't think we're going to make it too deep in carbon sequestration, but just know as a whole, depending on what happens with some things within the Senate, I expect for that discussion to happen in session in some semblance. So I feel like the Forestry Committee will probably meet in session to discuss some of the carbon stuff. I believe that's our less pressing issue of the day. On the agenda, we have a number of people from our partners in the industry that are gonna visit with us. I think one of the first things to understand, and they will go over with the committee as a whole, is that we have a timber market that includes residuals, and we have to get rid of them. In general, the European Union has always been a partner as far as the receiving of residuals, and they have quite an appetite for it. I think you're also going to hear some testimony about where the markets are with regard to the price of our timber products that are out there. If you don't know where the price of the timber products are, just go to a Home Depot or a Lowe's right now, or to your local hardware store, and you'll find out where your dimensional lumber pricing is. And you'll see where it's at, and you'll see it's a little bit lower than you remember it being the last time you were there. So as a whole, just know that we're not here to point fingers at anybody. This is an informational session. Last year, we had some bills dropped to start the discussion. From those bills, we had some discussions, and you'll see those. They're listed on here, 2009-2765. Some of our partners came in to discuss that with us. From that point, there's been some landowner discussions that have happened on the other side of the hall. And our friends in the House have sent their condolences about not being here today. Their regrets for not being here today. They are in some very important meetings where they're going to get some information of their own accord, but we'll let them do that. But some of those members over there have heard some discussions and complaints of their own landowners about what the EUDR is going to do to them. And then we've got our timber mills that are in the same point. That said, that's where we're at today. Please be cognizant of what's going on. Please listen to our speakers, because this is very important to the state of Mississippi. It's very important to our industry. It's very important to your constituents. So that said, we're going to start up with our good friend just over the border in Louisiana, Mr. George Guidry. Do you want to come up and visit with the committee and give some remarks? Please come up there and make sure there's green up there. If not, we can get Chris to go up there for you. Thank you.
Now it's green. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is George Guidry. I'm with Koch Government Affairs. Koch owns Georgia Pacific, and that's what we're here to talk about today, is all in relation to this EUDR. But I started with GP in 1988, so I've been there for a long time. GP has a long history in Mississippi. Right now we have 5 facilities, about 1,500 employees. 2 of our facilities have significant export business. Leaf River, which is located in New Augusta, produces fluff pulp. A lot of that fluff pulp goes to foreign markets. A lot of it is shipped out of the Port of Mobile. In fact, On average, a year, we'll ship out sort of something like 14,000 sealed containers for overseas. A lot of that goes to the European Union. Our other facility, big facility, is Monticello. Monticello makes linerboard, and some of that also is exported, some of it to the European Union. Like I said, we have 1,500 employees in the state of Mississippi. Our total impact is about $394 million. That's through direct and indirect jobs. I'm here today to talk a little bit about EUDR, but I'm going to ask David Brabham, who is in sustainability with GP. And David knows a whole lot more about EUDR and what's going on in that space than I do. And so I'm going to just give you a little overview, and then David can pick up, and I think y'all can go into details, and we'll both be available to answer questions. We understand the concerns of Mississippi landowners and the well-intentioned actions by the Mississippi legislature, you in particular, Mr. Chairman. I know that your heart's in the right place. I know that private property rights is important to you. We don't know that any action in Mississippi is likely to drive policy change in the EU. We've been working, I mean, it's like an uphill battle to get those folks to listen to what we think is reason, because the EU regulation is not well thought out. We don't think it's workable. But I think it's going to take movement on the national level, which means I think you've got to get the administration to really push hard to say this does not work for the United States. Their regulation was really aimed at trying to preserve the tropical rainforests. They decided that they were not going to buy products that unless it was deforestation free. And the last time I looked, we didn't have any tropical rainforest in the state of Mississippi. So I'll introduce David and ask David if he'd come up, or I can answer questions now if you'd like me to.
Does the committee have any questions for Mr. Guidry right now? And I hope, David, when you come up, I want to be sure that you go ahead and bring the basics of the EUDR up for us. And maybe we'll just reserve your questions for the end, Mr. Guidry, for both of you to determine. But I'd really like for you to give us the basics. Give this committee, because this entire committee doesn't all know exactly what we're dealing with here. And I need them to understand and be educated before we go any further with it, okay? So, Mr. Guidry, you can call him up right now. David Branham.
All right. Well, thanks for the invite, Mr. Chairman and committee. We're thankful that we got the invitation and get to share about this. I'm David Brabham, Senior Director of Customer Engagement, Sustainability, and Stewardship for Georgia Pacific. I've been working on EUDR since 2022. We have European customers that highlighted when this was just a bill in the European Union. So we tried to influence it through our trade associations, was unsuccessful. You know, we knew right away this was a very challenging for our entire supply chain. So, you know, it's been a challenge for us. We know it's a challenge for landowners and for our suppliers. Also, part of my EUDR role is trying to figure out how we take that regulation and work with it, because the European market is important for us. So I think, you know, Mr. Chairman, your point, maybe taking a step back and talking about what the regulation is. So the regulation started in really 2020, the idea around it in the European Union. And the idea was that they didn't want consumers in Europe buying products that contributed to deforestation. And they define deforestation as conversion to agriculture or livestock. So development and you know, roads, infrastructure are not included in their definition of deforestation. It is just conversion to agriculture and livestock. And that's really driven, to George's point, around what's happening in the Southern Hemisphere, is that there is conversion of large swaths of forest land to agriculture. And so the EU was looking to how do we stop this deforestation that's happening in the tropical regions. But instead of applying it just to where there's a problem, they applied it to the whole world. And the US does not have that problem, but we fell into the same regulation. And so the regulation requires a couple things. Actually lots of things, but the couple things that have been really painful and I think challenging for the entire industry is one is geolocation. So any product you sell into Europe, you have to be able to trace it back to the individual farm or farms where it was grown. And as you can imagine, in a forest products industry, there's residuals that were mentioned earlier from sawmills. There's logs that come into mills. They all go into a giant pile, get blended together to make a uniform product. And there's no way to say this roll of pulp came from this one farm. It's this roll of pulp came from 10 to 20,000 different farms because you can't separate whose chip is whose. So it's created an immense burden on our system and trying to just even create that data set that will allow us to have access to the European Union's markets. Then the other part that's been very challenging is around the commitment that our suppliers have had to take on of that we can't purchase wood that is knowingly being converted to agriculture or livestock. We've limited that in our agreements with suppliers to at the time of harvest or at the time of delivery to our mills, because we know our suppliers can't guarantee what a landowner is going to do 10 days down the road, a year down the road, 5 years down the road. So at the time of delivery, we can't knowingly accept wood that our suppliers know is being converted to agriculture or livestock use, which is, hasn't been good for GP. I know it's challenging for our suppliers and challenging for landowners. So it's been a big issue. And I would say those are the two biggest challenges we've faced with EUDR as a regulation. So that's kind of an overview of what the regulation does from a policy standpoint. It was set to go into effect at the end of last year. So we started our work on this program in 2024. We planned on it going into effect at the last minute, right around Thanksgiving. I guess we got a Thanksgiving Day gift and it was delayed for another year. Now it's set to go into effect December 30th of 2025. So in about a month and a half. There's conversation, and to my point earlier that even our, EU customers find this challenging and aren't happy about it. There's lots of conversation right now about should the regulation be simplified? Should it be delayed? We're optimistic that will occur. We're hopeful, but there's only like 34 days left in their legislative session in the EU, and they don't have a firm proposal yet. So we expect this is going to go into effect at the end of the year. We'll be happy if it doesn't, but I think that's the direction it's going. So that's kind of the state of play is for GP, for our suppliers, and for landowners in Mississippi. We have to all be compliant with this regulation to have access to the European market by the end of this year. So with that, maybe I'll kind of talk about why this is so important to GP and why we've been working on it for so long. So the trees, and George hinted at this, the trees from Mississippi end up all across the world. Southern yellow pine, it has a unique fiber. It's long and it's strong. And so it goes into certain products that no other tree in the world can make. So packaging that needs high strength ends up packaging materials that go all around the world because they can't be damaged. So that's from trees right here in Mississippi. Those fibers are coming from. And then George mentioned the fluff pulp, like at our Leaf River mill. Fluff pulp goes into absorbent hygiene products. So baby diapers, adult incontinence products, feminine hygiene products. And it is out of the whole world, the market for fluff pulp, over 80% of the fluff pulp is grown and manufactured in the US South. It's a unique fiber that no one else can replicate. So it's very important. So we have, babies all across the world that have diapers on that have wood fibers from Mississippi in the diapers they're wearing. So it's from Asia to Europe, Africa, South America, and right here in North America. So, it's a global market. About 70% of the pulp we produce across our GP business, like here at our Leaf River Mill, is exported to meet that demand. And when we look at that market, 25% of the softwood market globally is in Europe. So 25% of the softwood globally, the demand for it is Europe. So it's critically important to GP, to others who are exporters, but it's important to landowners here in Mississippi who need markets for their trees. It's important to our suppliers and to EU or to US manufacturers. So one of the things, I think I talked about this already, you know, one of the things that we've spent a lot of time on is thinking about how do we make this meet the minimum requirements where we can still access the EU market because it is so important to us. But also understanding this is a challenge for the entire supply chain. And so that's where we've landed on with our agreements with our suppliers. And we don't work directly with landowners very often. It's mainly suppliers who bring us logs or bring us chips. That with our suppliers, we have agreements in place where they can't bring us the wood if they know it's going to be converted to agriculture or livestock. And so I know that's been a challenge. It's been a change. But what is, you know, one thing that I need to just make sure very clear on is that we have no intent and our contracts cannot stipulate what happens to land in the future. You know, it is at the time of delivery, the best knowledge of our suppliers. We expect them to do due diligence on what's happening with that land. But we also know we can't make our suppliers, you know, commit to something for a year down the road. They don't know what's going to happen with that land. Most landowners, you know, don't know what's going to happen to their land 2 years down the road, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road. So our requirements are solely at the time of harvest and at the time of delivery. All this said, you know, I think a couple points to just mention here, and then obviously happy to take questions. You know, if I was leaving 2 points, one is, you know, I think we, Georgia Pacific, we've been heavily engaged with our industry associations. We've been directly engaged with the federal government through agencies and legislators. We've been in Brussels advocating on this issue. We know this regulation needs simplified, and the simplification needs to recognize responsible forest product supply chains and minimize all these requirements. The landowners here in Mississippi, the forest products industry in Mississippi, is already meeting the intent of the regulation, which is to have stable, healthy forest area. We're already doing that. So the simplification needs to include that. And we're going to continue to advocate for that. The second thing that I think I want to leave here with is that as one is, I guess, maybe an ask. And the ask isn't, we shouldn't be upset by this regulation, because Georgia Pacific's upset about this regulation. I don't think we should be. I think our customers in Europe are upset about the burdens it's placing on them. I think landowners we're hearing are upset. Suppliers are upset. I think all that's right and rightly placed. What I would ask is that as we think about what solutions look like, is that we really think about what the secondary effects of those are. And we need to ensure that we have access to the European markets. And so any kind of action that limits the access to the European market will have problematic impacts to not only GP, but our suppliers and to landowners. With that, you know, that 70% of the pulp we produce is exported, 25% of the global softwood market is in Europe. So we need to ensure we find a path forward, find simplification, hopefully, in the EU regulation, but not destroy our access to the European market. So with that, I'll stop here and answer questions. And again, thank you for your time.
All right, committee, I'm going to start with y'all. I'm sure that there's several questions. I know Senator Seymour has already hit me up on some, so Why don't we just start with Senator Seymour and go down the line with any questions y'all have got? Senator Seymour?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David, first off, our competitor in this field, what tree does Southeast Asia provide? Is it of the same technical fiber strength as our southern pines?
Great question. It's not. So both in Latin America and in Southeast Asia, they're growing trees that are typically that would classify as hardwood. It'd be eucalyptus and acacia, very fast growing trees, but they're hardwoods that have very short fibers. And so they're often used in products that need softness, so tissue, those sort of things. But the long fiber that our southern yellow pines grow, there's not much else that can grow those fibers.
My next question is, being that we have millions of tons of southern pine that is getting just mulched up in the ground because it cannot be, it doesn't meet the criteria for the European nations, but in Mississippi, maybe we can come up with a compromise. Back in 2016, we repealed the Brownfield Act, which allows for total clear cutting. If we was to be able to work something out with them under the old Brownfield Act, it was just a matter of leaving a certain number of seed trees per tract of timber. Maybe that would be an option that we could work toward.
Yeah. I guess I'm not familiar with the Brownfield Act, so can't speak to that directly. But I think, what the challenge we face, I think, as here in the state of Mississippi, but across the South, is that the European Union is so anchored to what this regulation is, that's been hard to move them away from anything other than if it's being converted to agriculture or livestock grazing, it's not acceptable. And so I think, we have to work towards, and I think it's at a federal level, working towards some type of international trade agreement on the fact that the U.S. is not a source of global deforestation, full stop, right? We are not the source they're chasing. And if they want to pursue in eliminating deforestation, they should put their energy to where the problem is and not target Mississippi forest landowners and Mississippi forest products industry.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, next, Senator Brumfield, you got something? You look anxious for me, so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Awesome job on your presentation. My question revolves around the area of economic impact. With your ask, what type of economic impact are we looking to explore? Can you give us some ballpark figures or something of that nature?
No, I don't think I'm qualified to give you an economic impact. I think as we think about, I think it's a very important question in multiple ways. One is, from an economic impact here in the state of Mississippi, the forest products industry is a critical part of the economy, right? And the export business is a big part of that forest products industry. I think losing that access to the EU is absolutely a negative economic impact. I don't have a quantification for you, but it would definitely be negative for especially our Leaf River fluff pulp mill, where we're exporting 70% of what we produce.
Senator Barry?
Good morning, and thank you. I grew up just a few miles north of GP Monticello, and vividly am aware of the smell of money the pulpwood plant produces. Is when the wind was out of the south, we held our nose and sometimes didn't go outside. But we also understood that meant jobs, that meant value to timber owners, that meant taxes in our local economy. So we are appreciative of GP Monticello for sure, down in Lawrence and Simpson, Jeff Davis counties and surrounding. Couple questions. you mentioned federally and, you know, I'm also back up just a little bit. I'm also a cattle farmer. And in my spare time, also run a trade association that represents cattle farmers here in the state. So I'm very familiar with this and particularly the livestock implications, but also concerned about the private property rights of just anybody out there. But federally speaking, what is the U.S. Trade Representative? Are they involved in this? Is there what type of federal action from our government is taking place? And I've got a few more after that.
So two things I want to point out. I agree, you brought up private property rights and yeah, I think, our belief is that free markets and private property rights are key to stable forest area. As soon as you start putting restrictions like EUDR on private lands, it makes it less enticing for a forest landowner to keep growing trees. It diminishes the value of their land. So, I think, you bringing that up, I just wanted to highlight that EUDR is not the way to get forest land to be sustainable. It's sustainable because there's a strong forest products industry and there's markets for trees. That's the answer. And so appreciate you bringing that up. And then the question about USTR, USTR in their April 1st global trade deficit report highlighted EUDR as a non-financial trade barrier. So they put it on the same level with other trade barriers countries have. It has been part of the trade negotiations between the US and EU. Even as far as in August, the US and EU issued a joint statement. And in that joint statement, they specifically mentioned EUDR and stated that they were going to work towards a mutually agreeable solution and that the EU recognizes the US as negligible risk. We have not seen any progress on that. So the USTR is absolutely involved, aware, but progress doesn't seem to be happening.
So you touched on a little bit, we're classified as low risk or negligible risk. And, as a cattle farmer, I spend a good bit of money down in Jeff Davis County every year on herbicides to make sure that the lovely popcorn trees or pine trees or sweet gum trees don't overtake my pasture. And, if you neglect a field down in that part of the world for 2 or 3 years, you've got a nice stand of saplings of a mixed variety. So, I just don't see that we're the risk that we're getting classified in there. And, that concerns me. And, we all here have got constituents that, through CRP or through retirement or whatever, they spend a lot of money and time and effort in planting, many of them converting cattle farms into pine trees for retirement. And, the value is not what it was, but this certainly doesn't help things. And so I also am aware that there's been some folks probably down in South Mississippi around that have ran into an issue with this already. Can you talk about, are y'all enforcing this? Is it already a problem that you've encountered? What type of instances have you had in Mississippi with this?
Yeah, it is we've already put in place our program to meet EUDR. And part of that's because of the length of the supply chain. So when, with the forest product supply chain, often at our mills, we're putting logs in storage underwater so that, when there's wet times, they don't, loggers aren't moving around as much. So we're storing logs. Sawmills have logs, then they're sawing them into chips. Chips are going on rail cars, going to a pulp mill. The supply chain can be from the time a tree is cut to the time it ends up as a roll of pulp at the back of our mill can be up to a year. So if we didn't have this in place, our program already in place, there's no way we could comply at the end of this year because the data and the requirements had to be in place a year ago. So yes, we've already put it in place. And yeah, I think we haven't seen a ton of challenges with it because in reality, you look at US data, conversion to agriculture and livestock is not a major issue in the US. It happens, but it's not a major issue. Infrastructure and development's the big issue, which isn't even in the regulation. So, hasn't been a major issue, but there have been some cases where we haven't been able to purchase wood. We're we don't tell our suppliers they can't purchase the wood. They just can't bring it to GP.
So I would say that there's probably a pretty good demand in South Mississippi for conversion to agriculture. We're pretty uniquely situated in South Mississippi to grow livestock, particularly in the wintertime. And I know I'd say the Highway 84 corridor, going east, particularly from say, well, either side of Monticello, that is kind of the prime area that I have seen land converted. And it's and I've heard tell of people that have had an issue already when they've got the contract and the loggers out there, and they've done it. So that brings me to the knowingly part about this and the contract that y'all have. And you mentioned it earlier, it's knowingly at harvest. So today I sell you my 200 acres of tract of timber, and I don't know that I'm going to clear it, but next week something changes and I do know that. Y'all haven't cut it. Y'all may not have finished, may have started, you're not finished cutting it, but my situation changed. How does that play out?
Yeah, so it is at the time of delivery. So if we haven't finished cutting it, yeah, we can't accept the wood anymore at the time of delivery. The future use has changed. But you're right, many landowners don't they may not know a week from them, they may be selling the property, right? They cut it. Their intent is to replant it, but if somebody's gonna buy the property, the new owner has decision rights for that property. So as long as the wood is delivered to us with the intent it's being planted, we can accept it. But yeah, once the intent is knowingly changed, we can no longer accept the wood.
Okay, so let's play that out a little bit further. And so I didn't know, 2 days later that I was going to cut it, but 2 months after y'all got through harvesting, I say, man, I want to be a cowboy, or I want to be a farmer and a planter, and I want to plant some corn or cotton, and I'm gonna take this and clear it up. Commodity prices changed or something, and I'm gonna clear it and do this. Are y'all going to use, is someone going to be monitoring that by satellite or by physical monitoring? Is there a concern? I guess there is a concern. How does that work long term going down the road?
So for us, we believe our obligation ends when that wood's delivered. And so as long as the intent is what it is, we expect our suppliers to do their due diligence and be honest with us. We work with good folks and they're honest people. They're going to deliver us the wood under those requirements. Once something changes 2 years down the road or 2 months down the road, we can't do anything about that. We have no obligation. We're not monitoring that. The European states that they're gonna monitor all of these geolocations. At the end of the day, the requirement was at the time of harvest or delivery. So even if they monitor it, we have the evidence that that was not the intent at the time of harvest. So it doesn't matter that the satellite says it's something different.
But, and I appreciate y'all mindset there. What concerns me is that the EU will come back and say, all right, GP, we're monitoring it and this has changed. We expect you to monitor as well and, change the contract going forward. That's what worries me about this whole deal. I understand the whole point of harvest time frame and all that, but just I worry about future actions, I guess.
Me too. So I'm not worried about Georgia Pacific stance on this. I think what we ran into originally when this regulation came out, we interpreted exactly what you said, which was, we would have to prove that it's never going to be converted. There's no way a company like Georgia Pacific or any company or any landowner can guarantee that. And there's no mechanism to do that. So that was a deal breaker. Once the EU issued some guidance that helped us get to the point where we understood it was at the point of delivery, we felt like, hey, at least it's not great, but it's at least workable because we know we can't predict out into the future what's going to happen. There's too many uncertainties.
Mr. Chairman, I have time for one more. I don't want to hog all the questions. So does operate in South America, Central America?
Not forest products.
Okay, so y'all aren't sourcing any pulp or anything like that from South
No,
America?
we have a sales office in South America that sells pulp from the US. So
Okay.
we don't source any trees in South America.
Thank you. That's all I've got.
Anybody else got any questions before I start? I will say this, I have a good committee. You didn't know that? They're asking questions, the hard questions that you're gonna have to answer. I will say this, that I feel bad for you because you're getting the hard ones, and Lee and Dino here in a moment are probably gonna get the easier ones because you've answered them for them. But I have a few more follow-up questions. You talked about the trade representative, and I dropped a letter out with loggers and several other industry partners about the import of washed pulp through the system. Are you telling me that there's none of that coming into your system? The
Can you-
washed
can you
pulp
re-
from
can you
South
re-
America?
So there is pulp from South America that we purchase for our consumer products business, different products altogether. So like our Leaf River Mill doesn't purchase pulp from South America. Monticello doesn't purchase pulp from South America. I think that's what you're asking.
But what I'm asking is any of that getting in the supply chain that is then turned around and marked as sustainable? In compliance with the EUDR?
It would have to meet the same requirements, but we don't have any products that have that are going to Europe. So I'm not.
That's my question on that, is that we do have, and the committee's kind of touched on this, is there is the problem with imported pulp that is being washed and sold back in the market as sustainable. I'm not saying you're doing it, but that's why I wanted to ask your question now. As far as the contract, do you have a copy of your contract that we can review?
Yeah,
You
I
get
think
that for
George
me?
has a
'Cause
copy.
I want to understand what we're dealing with. I'm an attorney by trade, not saying I'm a good one, but I got a degree, so I'd like to look at it one day to see exactly what we're looking at. Because what I'm hearing from you is vastly different from what I've heard a year ago, okay? And I'm not saying that things haven't evolved, and I think they are. We're dealing with an issue that honestly, this body has very little control over, other than the purse strings for tax money that's being utilized. That's really about the only purse strings we've got, and the constitutional provision that's already in place, the right to farm. So I think there's some private property rights that we're talking about there. But as far as the contract, the day this is struck, and I don't think that you're ever going to pull this out of your contract as long as it's being pushed to the side or there's a simplification. I think at the end of the day, your contract is probably going to have something in there regarding reforestation, as long as there is a threat from the European Union. I think that's a good business model, and I'm not going to fault you for that. But I would like to know whether, once it's out of the EUDR and Trump or Secretary Rollins issues the proclamation that we're done with y'all on this regulation, we're not going to uphold it in the United States, will it be removed from your contract?
Yeah, so we have no intent on what the regulation has required us to put in there doesn't help us prove sustainability. So it's not helpful to us. It's a burden to our suppliers. It's a burden to us, burden to landowners. There are other ways we can prove sustainability. There's great data sets out there. That's not an issue. And to your point, I think over the past, this has been an evolving situation over the past 3 years. There's been lots of confusion about what we required. Our contract language has not changed with our suppliers since we started putting it in place in 2024. So I think what happened is that, people interpret things differently. And, it's unfortunate. And also, we're one company, right? There's other companies out there that export to the EU. So I can't speak for everyone else. I can only speak about GP's practices. That's what our requirements are. So there could be confusion around that as well.
And that's part of the questions. That's why we're here today, is there's a lot of confusion out there as a whole. You say simplification. Tell me what a simplified product looks like from the EU regulation, because my opinion is I think the EU has already messed up their own country, and they're trying to tell us how we could fix ours when they've already screwed theirs up. So that's my problem with the EU right now, and I want to know what you think a simplified regulation would look like and how that's really going to help us, because my push will always be to just get rid of that regulation as a whole, as long as we're at a 3-to-1 growth to drain ratio here, and we're losing timber left and right to failure to be able to get rid of your thinnings and things of that nature. I have a problem with hearing this from the EU, and I'd be happy to tell them they're not going to listen to me because they're not reasonable. So tell me what a simplified regulation looks like.
Yeah, so I'm with you. I think, the regulation EUDR is overly burdensome for what the issues we have here in the US. We're not a contributor to global deforestation. So what simplification? Maybe I'll break this out into 2 points. One is, I mean, we only got 20 or 33, 34 days until the EU Parliament wraps up their year. So we have 33 days, let's say, to get something passed, right? So right now, every piece of advocacy we're doing, our trade associations are doing, is stop the clock, delay, make sure this thing doesn't go into effect at the end of the year. Once that happens, I think it opens the opportunity for simplification. And, there's proposals in the EU that I think have some legs to them. Some of them around no risk categories or negligible risk categories, where all of these requirements disappear for countries that can demonstrate their negligible risk for deforestation. I think that's the simple answer. I don't know how it'll be, adopted in the EU, but I think something along those lines where we're recognized that we're a global leader in forest practices. We have stable forest area. We don't need to do all these extra steps to prove what we already know.
So from what you're saying there, maybe you've given me a solution for, we understand there's potential legislation over there. If we were to go and do some legislation recognizing that Mississippi is a negligible risk, or that we are sustainable as long as we meet these thresholds, how are you going to determine those thresholds if we don't do something with regard to that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, since it's an EU regulation, they're determining the thresholds. So I think what we need to do, and what GP has been doing, our trade associations, I think it's something to think about is, how do we get this message to the right places within our federal government, within the EU, to understand what they're doing and the impact that it can have on forest landowners. And I will say that one interesting thing, there was a letter from the ag commissioners, I think, across all the states in the US that was sent to the EU Commission. And it was actually highly received. I think the EU values local thoughts and how it impacts local people. So, I mean, I think there are opportunities to influence that. But the EU is in the driver's seat. And so it's, how do we as an industry, state of Mississippi, federal government, influence what those thresholds are and make sure that, we're recognized for what we are, is a sustainable supply chain.
All right. Any other follow-up questions, Fran? I think we've got a couple other great speakers, and I'm going to give him a break on this one because I'd hate for Mr. Pittman not to have any questions. So, Mr. Brabham, be happy to speak with you later after this, but I appreciate you taking them. I know it's the hot seat to be in, and George just made you come do it. So I'm going to let you be relieved, and we're going to go to Zoom now to Mr. Lee Pittman. Lee, are you there?
Yes,
Lee
sir.
is you're with International Paper, correct?
That is correct, sir. I am Lee Pittman with International Paper. I've been with the company going on 28 or 29 years. I worked a little bit in Mississippi back in the early 2000s, but just recently regained responsibility from a GR perspective there. So I appreciate the opportunity to come here today or to Zoom in. I apologize for this. It's not my favorite way to communicate at all. But I think, because I have a few things to say. First of all, I think George and David did a fantastic job. David's depiction of the problem was spot on. It recognizes the challenges that we're facing right now. But I also want to say that I really appreciate what you're doing as well, because we have to continue to raise awareness and educate people who are unaware of our industry here in this country, to make sure that they understand we are not at risk of deforestation, that the way we practice forestry is, top notch. We have responsible people in a responsible industry who are engaged on a daily basis. And their decision and this thought process that the EU is currently going through, that is effectively trying to put everybody, every square peg into a round hole, into the same round hole, is very difficult for a global economy. Our perspective, we have the facilities we have in the state. We have the Vicksburg mill. We have the Columbus mill, which we are actually in the process of selling right now to a company called American Industrial Partners. But they are engaged in other forest activities as well, so that will continue on as is. But in addition to those two that are located within the state, we also have the Bogalusa, Louisiana mill, which is right across the border, which procures fiber from Mississippi, and as does our Alabama facilities as well. But I think the frustrating thing for us is, we absolutely are not in favor of deforestation. Our industry and our makeup and how we are going to survive going forward is going to be with a healthy working forest. And, so that is not really an issue for us. And I think David was, again, spot on, recognizing that the EU is actually struggling somewhat to figure out exactly where they're going to be on this. They have looked at delays, which they have not been able to herd their cats in the same direction on this yet. But as of last week, Austria is leading a group of 15 EU members to propose a 1-year delay to try to look and see if there's a way to simplify it. And like David, I don't know that I have a idea of what a simplified regulation would look like. But I would think it would be less than an absolute 100% knowledge of where every fiber comes from. So again, I don't want to be redundant with what George and David were saying, and just to recognize that I think, what you can do, you were asking, what can we do, just as, a Senate committee in Mississippi, I think there's a lot you can do. You can, as Dave and George said, we've been advocating with our U.S. trade reps, with our members of Congress, and with anyone that will listen to us. And we would encourage you to help us in that messaging as well. Your Mississippi senators are strong. We have a president that is not, one to shy away from a trade dispute, which I believe this is in some form and fashion. And I think we need to continue to push back to try to make this regulation, which is going to be burdensome to landowners, to forest growers, and for industry alike, to make it go away, or at least make them understand there's no threat here in the U.S. to the problem they're trying to solve. We're not the tropics, as George said. We're not removing rainforest, and the issue is just not the same here. I think one other thing I would just recognize as an important note, what David touched on too, is, for our people that are procuring fiber for our facilities, we have to know at the point of sale, effectively, point of delivery, what the intent is with that property. But beyond that, whether it's 1 day, 5 days, 2 weeks, a year, or 5 years, that's not going to be a responsibility that we're going to have to be held to, nor should anyone else. I'm not trying to suggest playing games, because I think the issue of deforestation is real around the globe. But again, I would say, we all make decisions differently at different times for different reasons. I don't know if you can see the picture behind me, but I, like the senator who spoke a while ago, I'm also a cattle farmer, and I raise trees as well on the side. I've never been a good golfer, but I love my cows. So, I am a terra firma kind of guy, loves dirt, outdoors, and trees and everything else. And I don't believe that what they are doing in Europe should apply to how we do our business here, because there's no justifiable reasoning behind it. So with that, Senator, Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad to answer questions what I can, and what I can't, I'll be glad to come back later and supply you with them, or come in person to have those further discussions as well.
Thank you, Lee. Committee, do you have any questions for Mr. Pittman? So, Mr. Pittman, I do have just a few for you. Can you tell me about what your economic impact in the state is for IP?
I don't have that right in front of me. If you count the two mills, you're looking at about a $500 million worth of economic activity each. We no longer own forest lands there in the state. So, you're looking at a substantial presence still, and we're looking at more. So that's just on the mill side. We have numerous box plants as well, converting facilities. We primarily, the Columbus mill, to go back just a second, it like George's mill is a fluff pulp mill. That's the one we're selling. Vicksburg is a brown mill that it goes into the purchase of boxes. Not as many of those boxes will go to Europe. The fluff goes all around the world, but the frustrating thing again on this regulation is we can't pinpoint every fiber to every plot of land out there. So you asked about our economic impact. I will get you that number in full. Be glad to bring you all of our employee count and exactly how much economic input we do in the state.
I appreciate that. I want the committees to know kind of where we're at as far as our state. Additionally, we've talked a little about the U.S. Trade Representative and the investigations going on. Do y'all have any import? Do you import any of the pulp from Brazil or from South American countries?
We have played with that along the way, and we are currently not doing that. It's we've been very fortunate to be able to procure most of what we need here, for all of what we need here in the U.S. And IP has changed shapes many times over the years, but we have basically now separated our company down to the U.S. and Europe. So we don't have operations in the other parts of the world that we sell products there, but we're not importing in from others.
All right. Those are pretty much the questions I had for you. Like I said, Mr. Pittman, I told you that David was going to take the hard ones for you.
Thank goodness for Dave.
All right. Mr. Pittman, I appreciate you coming in. I haven't gotten to know you very well, but we appreciate you coming in today, and we appreciate the investment in Mississippi. I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to call in one of someone I know a little bit better than many of you. Mr. Dino Orr and I have got to hang out and visit a good bit. I was able to go visit their mill up in Senator Suber's district, and Dino, he is floating around here somewhere listening to part of this hearing. He's very interested in the investment that's going on up in the Bruce area, and I think that we're glad to have you today. Dino would like to apologize, I know, in that with the current pricing of the products out there, they're trying to be sure and be diligent in their expenses there at Weyerhaeuser so that they continue to run in our state. So, Dino, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we appreciate you being here.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. And Senate Forestry Committee members, I really, really appreciate you all giving us an opportunity and a voice and a platform just to share our perspective. Can you all hear me clearly? Okay.
Yes.
So one of the things that I would first like to say is I can vouch for Mr. Lee Pittman. He's awesome. I retired from International Paper, so Lee Pittman and I had an opportunity to work together for well over 20 years. So his word is his bond, and he's always accurate in his assessments of everything that comes out of his mouth. So appreciate having the opportunity to even work with Lee again on this issue. I am Dino Orr, as Senator McCon mentioned, and I'm proud to serve as Weyerhaeuser's regional manager of advocacy and philanthropy across Mississippi and Alabama, Louisiana, Georgia and Florida. And one of the things that I would like to start off by sharing is, this year Weyerhaeuser celebrates its 125th year in business. And we've been a part of the Mississippi fabric since 1956. And it's not just us, but if you listen to the previous speakers, which have done an excellent job, their operations have also been in business for 98 and over 100 years. And so clearly these are businesses that have been around for a long time and been trying to do the right things in their communities. And so I know some of the questions have come up over, what's the economic impact of your different businesses. For Weyerhaeuser, we support Mississippi with over 650 jobs, including lumber mills in Bruce, Macomb, and Philadelphia, of course. We also have tree seedling orchards in Hazelhurst, and we have timberland offices in Brookhaven, in Hattiesburg, Meridian, as well as Columbus. And of course, we manage more than 1 million acres of timberland here in Mississippi. And on average, we harvest only 2% of our timberlands each year. And so, like Lee mentioned earlier, we have made it a point to always make sure that we have healthy operating forests here in Mississippi and across the Deep South in the region that I'm responsible for. Again, I want to thank Senator McCon and this committee for your efforts to highlight what is a critical issue, which honestly is being unfairly imposed on U.S. forestry stakeholders, all U.S. forestry stakeholders, solely due to this EUDR compliance policy. And so I do want to acknowledge, and I think it's already been acknowledged and recognized, that this burden that the EUDR compliance places on smaller sawmills, and some landowners that want to convert their lands from forestry to ag commodities. This is a serious issue. It's an important issue for all, I think, forestry stakeholders. And that's why, as you've heard before, and David and George and Lee have already expressed it well, that we've been continuing to work with all of our trade associations and delegations to try to find ways to either delay this or lessen the requirements from EUDR, which of course can unfairly penalize all of our stakeholders. Naturally, we've already covered it for more than a century. Hey, we've been doing the right things to make sure that our timberlands remain healthy and operating forestry and free from deforestation threats and things of that nature. I guess my comments would be, and I'm not an expert on this issue. I'm not an attorney like Senator McCon, and I've never written a contract. So I don't have the details of that, the technical details. But I would say that Weyerhaeuser is simply an innocent bystander and has not traditionally placed products on the EU market. However, we do rely on the markets involving the other companies like GP and like IP that are represented here today to keep the flow of mill byproducts and pulpwood moving smoothly. That is critically to our operations. And so we want to make sure we support this effort to find a resolution. And, with that, I'll stop right there. I don't have a lot of comments. Just wanted to let you know our position on this, of course. Truly appreciate this opportunity to speak and share our perspective on these EUDR mandates, which seem to unfairly impact, like I said, all U.S. stakeholders. And I'll take any questions at this time, Senator McCon. Thank you again for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Dino. As I said, I appreciate the relationships with all three of these companies here. Committee, do you have any questions for Dino? I'll say this before we move on into the forest owners who are going to speak here in a moment. The three of you represent the largest impact in our state as far as our forest products. You're the big dogs in the room. We are thankful to have some smaller mills that are building We've got Shuckalock here today, and we know that them and Hankins have continued to build up. And on a state level, we're so glad to have them. Y'all are more the global leaders in these fields. And I am encouraged to hear that you are not in favor of this, and I hope that you three will be moving towards putting pressure on your associations that you're involved in to continue the federal push. It's going to take you. Not going to take the state. It's going to take you. I can do a proclamation. This committee can do a proclamation, but until you put the pressure from your associations on a global level to our federal delegation, I don't see the official change happening. And I think you've continued to do that, but unfortunately, we've just been getting delays. So I encourage and I appreciate all three of you being here today. Dino, I really don't have any questions for you. You heard the questions I was going to ask, and you kind of put them out there. So I want to move on from there to our National Alliance of Forest Owners. We have Sam Barnett here, the Director of Government Relations, and I'm going to ask Sam to come on the screen and let's visit with Sam.
Hey everybody, good morning. Dion Nelson is the Vice President of Government Relations for NAFO, and we're going to be tag teaming the presentation. I'm actually going to kick it over to Dion first for a brief introduction, if that works for the committee.
So you're going to flip over to Dion? Dion, are you still there?
I am. If that's okay, I can get us kicked off and we'll tag team the presentation if that's fine with you all.
All right. Dion Nelson is our vice president there. So y'all go ahead, however you need to do it.
That's it. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Chairman, for having us. We're delighted to speak to you this morning. As just said, I'm Dion, and my colleague Sam and I are with the National Alliance of Forest Owners. NAFO is a DC-based trade association. We represent private working forest. Weyerhaeuser is one of our members, as is MOLPUS and RMS in Mississippi. We got about 45 member companies, and we cover about 46 million acres of land nationally, in Mississippi specifically. 15 of our companies are there, and we got 2.2 million acres in your state. So when you're talking about forestry being the number 2 commodity in Mississippi, we're a major part of that. We got prepared comments, not necessarily on EUDR, but about other stuff going on in the federal policy space, things that we think are going to be relevant to y'all. And so we're going to talk about that. I'm happy to report that forestry writ large is having sort of a moment this year at the federal level. President Trump started the year off with a couple of executive orders that have been helpful and impactful to the industry. We've seen the agencies at the DC level soften some regulations and increase some investment in forest management, which is good. And Congress is actually picking up on some forestry specific legislation, which is something it doesn't always do, and especially not at the speed that it's currently doing it. So I want to kick it over to Sam first to kind of give you all an update of what's happened federally, what's been done and what's going to be done. And then I'll come back to me to sort of close out with what we think is going to happen at the end of the year and where federal policy is going to go and how you all may or may not be able to plug into that. So with that, over to Sam.
Chairman and members of the committee, good morning. Thank you for the invitation to participate today. Like Dion said, I'm Sam Barnett, Director of GR here at NAFO. The 119th Congress has been busy. Now that reconciliation has been addressed through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, Congress has turned its attention to fiscal year 2026 funding. The longest government shutdown in history, started on October 1st, lasted 44 days, is finally behind us as of last night. Every Senate Republican except Rand Paul from Kentucky, 7 Democrats and 1 independent voted to reopen the government until January 30th, 2026, with a commitment from the Senate leader from South Dakota to consider healthcare subsidy extensions. Some furloughed federal workers have been informed that they should be prepared to report for duty today, and nutrition benefits have been reinstated. Outside of that, we're tracking several legislative vehicles involving forests and wood equities. The Fix Our Forest Act, introduced in the Senate by John Curtis of Utah and in the House by Bruce Westerman of Arkansas, was marked up and voted on by the U.S. Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. Every member of the committee, except for senators from Colorado, Illinois, Minnesota, New Jersey, and California, voted for this bill. This legislation will combat catastrophic wildfire, prioritize restoration, and streamline efficient, responsive management of forest land. The FY26 Agricultural Appropriations Bill reopened the United States Department of Agriculture and included extensions to programs that were authorized in the 2018 Farm Bill. Fiscal year 2026 Interior and Environment Appropriations bills are being considered as part of a 5-bill minibus right now at the Senate. This funding bill includes the U.S. Forest Service's budget. Of note, the bill recognizes that biomass is carbon neutral and provides $15 million for the Community Wood Energy Program, which is a competitive grant that supports the installation of woody energy systems and wood product manufacturing facilities. It is possible that Congress will take up an economic assistance for agricultural producers struggling with the current trade landscape. At this time, it's our understanding that timber is not included in that conversation, but senior staff at USDA has shared that the department is committed to monitoring current market conditions and considering all options for assistance. President Trump has issued several executive orders targeting the timber industry. Of note, the immediate expansion of American timber production EO says that the production of timber is critical to our nation's well-being and calls for the U.S. Interior Department and USDA to implement policies that promote sound forest management, streamline approvals for forestry projects, and reduce timelines for project decisions. The EPA also issued guidance that exempts smoke from all prescribed fires from regulations under the National Ambient Air Quality Standard, or NAAQS 2.5. This work was done in response to President Trump's EO on empowering common sense wildfire prevention and response. Recent trade actions note that wood products are essential inputs across multiple sectors, supporting national defense, critical infrastructure, economic stability, and industrial resilience in the United States. To Dion's point earlier, forestry is having a moment on the federal stage, and we're excited about this momentum. So with that context, I'd like to say thanks again and welcome Dion back to walk through NAFO's policy priorities.
Thanks, Sam. I was heartened to hear the themes that y'all were talking about earlier, and the recognition that there's some needs out there in the forestry space. It goes without saying that healthy markets drive modern forestry. Land costs money, full stop. And if what's going on land isn't paying the bills, then all those landowners at some point are going to consider changing their operations to doing something that will produce more money. And right now, in a lot of places in Mississippi and across the country, forestry simply is not penciling out for landowners the way that it has been in the past and the way that it should be right now. From a public policy perspective, it's really important to understand what's happened with our markets and be specific on how we can think about fixing it. Ideally, state policy that y'all are doing, federal policy, and then the efforts of private industry like NAFO member companies are going to align to sort of mutually support healthy markets for forest products. The earlier speakers talked a lot about EDR and trade, and that's an extremely important component of our model. But I want to break it down further to something a little bit even more fundamental, which is the fact that here at home, we are not selling our basic products at an acceptable rate. Let's talk really quickly about those overarching economics and how they're letting us down right now. Forest and sawmill owners make about 80% of their needed profits from the sale of timber. We make about 20% off the sale of our residuals, things like limbs left over from harvest and bark and sawdust that's left over from the mill process at a sawmill. There's two things I want to really focus on. One is housing starts. Housing starts drive the lumber market, and housing start numbers in the U.S. are grim. Over the last 20 years, we've underbuilt U.S. housing by about 4 million units. Typically, you want to build about 1.25 million units a year, and we're building about 1 million units a year. So we got to do two things. We got to get our number back up to 1.25, but then preferably would actually get higher than that to make up the gap that expanded over the past 2 decades. It's very important. So when you think forestry, you need to think about housing. How do we do that? There's an example at the federal level. The U.S. Senate introduced and advanced the bill, the Renewing Opportunity and the American Dream to Housing Act of 2025. It's also called the Road to Housing Act. They put it in the National Defense Authorization Act. That package passed the Senate and has gone over to the House, and we think there's a really good chance for it to pass into law, and we should all be watching it. There's a lot in this bill, but there's 4 particular things that our sector ought to look at, and y'all should be looking at too. Number one, there's a lot of permitting and zoning reform that just increases the speed and the velocity of new housing starts. Number two, there's specific support in this bill for manufactured and modular housing. This is types of construction that can utilize engineered and prefabricated wood like mass timber. So that's good. We need to see more of that. Number three, there's $1 billion in targeted capital to help communities invest in their own infrastructure. So that can be multifamily housing, but it could also be other buildings like hospitals and schools, things like that. And number four, there's a specific program in this bill that gives rural and affordable housing provisions and focuses at the housing at HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and at USDA. So that can sort of bolster the demand for local timber near wood baskets where there's rural communities that need help. So I would encourage you to work with your colleagues in the Mississippi Senate to not only encourage housing starts where you can, but when you do anything to encourage housing starts, think about incentivizing wood construction within that subset of housing starts that gets going. And then the second thing I want to talk about is that we need collectively to address our residual markets. Historically, the pulp and paper industry absorbed the bulk of the residuals from a landowner or from sawmills. But due to changes and evolutions within the paper and pulp processing industry, less and less of our virgin fiber is being purchased. By NAFO's calculation, from 2014 to 2025, about 43 to 50 million less tons of virgin fiber are being processed by the pulp and paper manufacturing industry. That's a lot of tons. It's a lot of tons that we're either selling at a continually declining rate, or we're having to pay for someone to come take it away from us and either landfill it or light it on fire. And it's affecting Mississippi landowners, Mississippi forest owners in particular. In 2014, the average pulpwood price in North Mississippi was $6.82 a ton. In South Mississippi, it was $11.33 a ton. The respective 2025 average prices are $3.90 and $5.77. I mentioned earlier that the residual market makes up about 20% of what we need in our overall profits. The price trough that we're currently in for pulp and residuals, that slices away half of that 20% straight off the top. This is a big deal and it has downstream impacts across the whole sector. So we need to get really creative in finding new markets for residuals. There's two solutions that we see, and they're both in the energy space. There's heat and power, and there's also the opportunity for advanced biofuels. On the heat and power side, woody biomass can meet the US's growing energy demands. It could be backup power for DoD installations. New data centers that go in could be powered with woody biomass, or we could simply use woody biomass to put it back on the grid for houses. People need this stuff. This is especially true for a wood basket state like Mississippi. You guys got the product, you could put it in the energy grid. On the liquid fuel side of things, technology now exists to take woody biomass and convert it into aviation fuel. That's called sustainable aviation fuel. The acronym is SAF. You'll hear a lot about SAF. If you're familiar with ethanol and gasoline, you know, ethanol is a blend that goes into gas. Woody biomass SAF is not. It's a drop-in fuel that can go in one for one, or it can be blended, but it doesn't have to be. Planes can fly on woody biomass SAF. They have flown on it, and the airline industry wants it. But we're not making enough. We're not making the quantities that are needed to truly get it off the ground at the rate of demand that we think is going to open up for it. Mississippi is primed to be a national leader in SAF production. Just think about it. You got the trees, you got an important river, and you got port infrastructure. You guys can make this stuff and you can ship it wherever it needs to go. And you should capitalize on that opportunity. Unfortunately, I'll close out by saying there's not a lot of current major legislation at the federal level that is going to promote the residual markets that we need. However, we do have a really good example of something going on in Arkansas from Governor Sanders, and I want to put in front of you. In April, they passed Act 546, which was called the Sustainable Aviation Fuel Incentive Act. That gives a 30% tax credit to facilities that are producing jet and aviation fuel from woody biomass. Mississippi should take that as an example and think about it and try to position yourself alongside Arkansas as a leader in the growing field of SAF production. But to close out, I'll just say our overall market problems are very deep and they're very complex, but with the right creative policies and cooperation, they are solvable problems. And if forest products markets don't recover soon, we're going to risk seeing forests converted to other more profitable and permanent uses for landowners. You all know how the supply chain works and the vicious cycle that we're in. And if we do see this massive conversion without a backstop of a healthy market, it's going to be bad for everybody. So anyway, I'll stop there. Thanks for your time. Thanks for having me and Sam here, and we'll take any questions if you have them.
All right, thank you, Sam and Dion. Committee, do you have any questions? So from what I'm hearing from you, Dion, Vice Chair, you're encouraging us to invest more in the residual markets as best we can, right?
Yes, absolutely. Residual markets are something that we can address a little bit quickly. Housing on a more larger global level is going to be harder to do. That's a little bit more linked to the overall economy and interest rates and things like that. It's the bulk of what we do, and we need to focus on housing. But residuals are something that we can get right now to create gain on that marginal gain that we need to stay solvent.
Unfortunately, even if we were to do something right now, and we're talking 10-year return on our investment now. We're not talking about a 2-year or 3-year return. We do have some pellet mills here in Mississippi, and we're thankful for those. But at the end of the all be all, pellets aren't your final answer to fixing the residual markets. The paper industry and the reductions there caused a substantial hole that we're trying to fill, and I just can't see that being our final one. So it's going to take a multi-shot approach, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We've looked at this as we're just trying to layer solutions, like there's SAF, there's pellets, there's different kinds of wood energy. Yeah, there's other kinds of market solutions. And if everything takes up 15% of the problem, we can finally stack enough on top of each other to get close to that 100% solution.
So I will have to ask this on the SAFE Act. So does that sustainable aviation fuel, does it cash flow? Because I've seen and I've been to a plant in California for the biomass energy production, and everything I hear is it cash flows, it cash flows. Well, almost. It cash flows as long as we have subsidies. So my question is, are we looking at things that are going to require subsidies, or are we looking at things that are eventually would be a market that would actually stay within the black, or are they going to be operating in the?
We believe it's a market that would operate in the black. The original renewable fuel standard for ethanol, for over-the-road gasoline, it was very much meant to be an incentive to get the industry off the ground so that it could start competing. And then in time, you would wean off of that incentive. I think that's what the sustainable aviation fuel industry wants as well. They want a little bit of money to be competitive so that they can get this stuff off the ground, and then hopefully have a self-sustaining industry. And I will say too, that people are looking to make SAF with different feedstocks. So if you're a SAF provider and you can drop straight into Iowa and take corn stover and get your subsidy, because it already exists, or you can go to Mississippi and get your woody biomass feedstocks, well, you're going to make the choice to go to Iowa. So it's not whether or not we try to get a subsidy, it's that the subsidies are already out there, and it's going to keep timber states in the Northwest and the Southeast and the Northeast from even being competitive to get that initial SAF production facility to come in. They're just going to default to the Midwest under the current system. So what we're trying to do is open up that system so that you all can access it as well.
Very good. Any other questions? Well, thank you both for being with us today, and I really do appreciate y'all coming in and zooming in. These are areas that we definitely need to be having discussions about. We're going to wrap up today with Mr. Joe Hankins, who's Vice President of Hankins Lumber Company, and I think I have a little statement that I was going to introduce you on, Joe, but Hankins Timber has mills in Grenada, third generation operator, past president of Mississippi Lumber Manufacturers Association. Today, we've asked him in here to kind of give us a broad market update on the lumber, and to be honest with you, the health of their mills. So, Joe, I appreciate you being here today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee, for allowing me to speak to y'all this morning about the issues of the sawmill industry and the current market conditions we're seeing here in Mississippi. Just give you a little backstory. Our company's been in business since 1957. Like Mr. Senator said, I'm a third generation sawmill owner and operator. We have 2 sawmills here in the state based out of Grenada and a manufacturer of southern yellow pine lumber. And we are also a timberland owner in the state. We've amassed 36,000 acres of softwood and hardwood timberland here in the state that we also manage throughout the harvesting process. Quick little update on the lumber market. It's no secret. The last 3 years since COVID, the lumber market has been suppressed substantially due to unaffordable housing market and mortgage rates increasing and going up. The result to that has also plummeted lumber prices across the board in all species to basically below pre-pandemic levels. And the fight with that a lot of the sawmill industries are dealing with now is we are at a cost base of what we were before COVID, but also an increased price of manufacturing to run our operations today. And lots of sawmills have also had to curtail or lose some production somewhat throughout that time frame to result in that gap of market share that is not with us at this current market status. The main thing that we are also seeing, and Mr. Dion Nelson just spoke about, is that residual market share that has dramatically changed in the state. I know in the past 5 years, since 2020, we have been lucky to add production of up to 1 billion board feet of lumber capacity, with 4 more sawmills coming in the state since 2020. And with that increase of production, we've also increased our chips, our bark, our sawdust, our shavings, and all the residual process that comes from making logs to lumber in the manufacturing process. And in that same time, we've not had a big increase in the market share of usage for those residuals that we produce even more today than we have in any previous years. So that has been a constant battle of sourcing, homes for our residual market, of all 4 of those residuals, primarily chips. It seems to be the biggest outlet that everybody's a little over capacity in right now. And so pretty much a lot of us are having to take our product out of the state. A lot of our own personal products are going into Tennessee and Alabama because of those have the biggest openings of value, not just value, but actually can absorb the volume. Every mill, the further they have to go with their residuals, they net less at the mill due to the freight, right? So when you have to do that, you also are netting less return to your mill and your operation, and you do it in a way to keep yourself be able to run full production, because unfortunately we can't just pile this stuff up and burn it, keep burning it off, or keep piling it up, not sell it and keep it moving. So it is a problem across the board for a lot of manufacturers in the state that are not having enough residual capacity in or around them or in the state to consume, especially the volume they're already producing or the influx of volume that we've also had here in the state of Mississippi. And as far as, it's a couple, like Mr. Nelson hit on all of those aspects as far as the outlets to increase residual capacity, sorry. As far as paper pellets, biochar, cogen, linerboard, it's so many other, and then the biofuel, biomass burnings, it's so many things that are coming online that we are start seeing a little bit more takeaway there, but we have not had that come into our state to that level to really make a dent in the residual problem that we are facing, because every meeting that I'm a part of, organization, everybody everywhere in the southeastern United States, the biggest thing the problem they're facing is the residual market and the consumption of the residuals that they produce at all their sawmills. And it's one of these things, I feel like it's really turned up the heat in the last 5 years, and it kind of got really bad in the last year to 2 years if you look across the southern United States, as far as a lot of closures and a lot less consumption that's being used out there. And another aspect I wanted to talk about, like I said, we're also a landowner and a timberland owner in the state. Without a healthy residual market for a manufacturer that also uses roundwood, that first thinning pulpwood that sawmills like myself and majority of all of us have no use for, that's just for chipping, it is suppressing the timberland in the forest in Mississippi as well, without a pulpwood market that is accessible for us as landowners. So without that healthy market there, we can't practice best land management practices, which equates to suppression of our timberland. So where that timber harvest stand was going to go for 25 to 30 plus years, you're going to suppress it even further out to where it also hurts the timber base getting all to our sawmills. So the timber base that is set on a 25-year stand without any thinning or no best forest management practice observed, that's going to put that landowner out a lot more. And also at the same time, fiber coming into our industry is going to be suppressed as well. So without a good roundwood market as well, it benefits not only the sawmills, but it also benefits the landowner as well that had built and planted that stand for a generational turn, for a profit on a pulpwood, to look at a harvest in 25 years. And it does not entice him to do it again down the road with those roadblocks that we're seeing. It's somewhat there. And like I say, we're in that same ball of wax as well. We'd like to practice best management practice, but where we are currently located in our two mills in Grenada, we had a paper mill that just recently closed down in September. And they took all the roundwood within a 60-mile radius of Grenada. And they took about 100 to 125 loads of just our chips and residuals a week. And once that went away in September, there is no first thinnings going on in our area. That changes the dynamic of your fiber base over your next 20-year terms. You can push that out a little bit more. And it's just got no residual or roundwood usage in our current market to where we are today. So it's just going to keep progressing the problem that is already a problem for many people throughout our industry, not just in Mississippi, but across. And it seems like we have to really focus an emphasis on finding a resolution to eradicate this problem, not just for the sawmill industry, but for the landowner as well, because we're all in this together and we're all benefit from this happening and helping us all get through this residual that also affects our timber suppression as well. Like I said, I think that is pretty much, and then one more little thing I was going to touch on as well. We're sitting here right now in our current state of the market, with the lumber market not being great, but also the residual market being a big question mark. It also, I believe, is going to not be advantageous to help bring in more production to the state. We're sitting here right now. 2025 was not a good year for the history of our company. We actually, March 11th, we lost one of our mills to a fire. And 3 days later, one of those tornadoes cells that came through on the 14th hit the rest of the plant. Complete planer, one dry kill, and every other structure building that wasn't affected by the fire, guess what? The tornado got it. So we're sitting here right now, went through all our due diligence, done the insurance claim, everything's looking good. And our biggest question mark today to come back bigger, stronger, add more jobs, get back to that 200+ employee base is the biggest hinge right now. The unknown is because we're lumber people. We're sawmill. That's all we've ever done. Third generation, never done anything worse since I was 9 years old there. So the biggest question we got today is where are we going to go with the residuals on the rebuild and all that market that we don't have anything close to our area and we don't see it. We haven't seen it getting better around from the local locations. So we're having to go out of state for a lot of that volume to keep our production up. And we're going to increase that production and increase the jobs. So at the same time, that is one question mark and one thing we've been monitoring very closely. Since all this happened and since the paper mill also closed in our town, as far as where we're going to source that residual market for the future of our company. And if there's any questions anybody would like to ask, I'm available for any questions.
Committee, I think Senator Berry's got a question.
So you talk about residuals and you're going out of state. I assume you're going to another pulp mill or something with that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other opportunity to market that another avenue other than a pulp with your residuals, or is that really the only place you've got to go with that?
Well, it's a pellet mill in Alabama.
Okay.
That's opened up over in Alabama. That's ramping up right now that we are sending some over into Alabama.
I'm just thinking of, opportunities is, what are we missing that we don't have that could, provide that opportunity for residuals?
What opportunities are we missing?
Yeah, like in Mississippi, if they got the pellet plant or another pulp mill, is that what we're missing in Mississippi for you to be able to sell your residuals?
Yes, I believe so. Like Dion spoke on, it's a bunch of new things out there. as far as, as far as it's really going to target the problem, the biomass and the biofuel burning and the conversion to aviation fuel, which I think that would be something down the road, and that might be something that will come to fruition really strongly. That's not there right at this moment, that's viable yet or proven. But as far as, we were also at the same time almost had a pellet mill coming in right next to me, and they backed out of the agreement with the city. And but it was a pellet manufacturer out of Arkansas that was going to put one about 2 miles from our mill. And so that when the paper mill went down, it was about 4 sawmills that were affected in the area that were taking residuals to that one mill. But from what we've seen is the pellets are the first one that's to the board that's kind of been coming in to take up a little bit of that excess volume.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Senator Seymour?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hankins, from your being in the third generation of the timber production, the pellet mill and some of what you're talking about, your byproducts, without the federal subsidies that have been instituted, especially in the pellet mill, do you see any of these products being able to sustain themselves on their own without the help of the federal government?
I think the way that you can sustain that on your own is more usage in our own country of the pellets. I think being reliant on shipping them out of the country is pretty difficult, like what you're saying, and the regulations that come with that. It's kind of hard to make a product and send it, and it's got a big carbon footprint behind it with all the regulations of the pellet process, where we're shipping them to Europe right now. So you need to be close to a water source for that. And where in Mississippi, pretty much majority of the state is not close to a water source that makes that as viable as it could be.
But taking that fiber, knowing a little bit about the background of it, it takes a whole lot of energy to make the pellet, the process in itself. It versus petroleum, there's no comparison, is it?
Versus petroleum is no, sir. No comparison.
Thank you.
All right, Senator Brumfield?
Thank you for your presentation. Am I hearing correctly that one of our major obstacles are regulation or EPA surrounding the regulations and as to why companies are interested in back out? Do you have any intel on why companies would come and not want to consider us?
As far as that current incident, that company they had to put a bigger capital investment in another plant. So they didn't have the capital to go forward with the project. You're talking about the pellet mill, is that
Yeah.
correct? Yes, sir. They end up having to back out of building that new facility due to some other facilities that had some problems, and they had to regenerate that infrastructure at some other facilities and spend that capital there. So that's why they didn't pursue going through with that project.
Okay, I'm understanding that Drax in Gloucester, Mississippi, we're having challenges there with the community and environment, things of that nature. So I was just wondering if that was one of the hurdles that we were facing. So thank you.
Yes, sir. This was another mill. This was not part of the Drax Corporation as far as this one.
So, Mr. Tankins, getting Mr. Forestry. I appreciate you being here. Can you tell me where you're looking at your futures, you're looking at your markets, as you're beginning your production for this quarter of the year or for the end of the year? Where are we at, and what are our futures looking like for the next 6 months? On do you do dimensional lumber or do you do hardwood mill?
Yes, sir. Well, our dimensional lumber burned down. That sawmill is the one that burned. We're still making timbers at a small log mill in Grenada. So we're only making 4x to 6x as far as that. And our feel as far as the lumber market, it will come back, sometime first quarter, second quarter next year, we hope. And what we're looking at as far as reinvesting and rebuilding the sawmill and which will be about a year-long process for us before we be back in full production. And that's why we've been kind of monitoring the residual situation when that plant went down close to us, seeing if it's an influx of anything going to maybe come and replace it to take that volume in our area, because it's all about the distance you are from a home for residuals that you have to really focus on, and knowing we're going to produce almost twice as much. That's one of the main objects that we're watching to see how that develops before we decide to rebuild.
And I haven't even asked you what mill that was. Was it one of y'all's mills? Any of our folks in here that shut down? The Grenada mill that shut down, the paper mill, was it?
It was yes, sir. It was Domtar.
Okay. It was who now?
Domtar.
Okay, so it wasn't one of our group in here. I was just curious as to what their reasoning for the shutdown of the mill was.
Well, see, that was a newsprint mill. So they made newspaper there, which, as we all know, is a pretty much going away industry. It's mostly going overseas. And Domtar, from what we have been told and communicated with them, they own 3 of those mills, 2 in Canada, 1 down here. And so that mill in Grenada, Mississippi has been in operation since '84, I believe. And for their demand of their product, they only had the capacity to supply that demand out of 2 mills. So they were going to curtail and then shut down one of those 3 mills out of those. And they landed on Grenada being the one, even though the fiber cost was obviously much lower than it is in Canada, but they also had their plants in Canada were more optimal for production standpoint.
It's very disappointing. So let me ask you this. We've talked and you've heard a lot about, well, before we get off on that, one of the approaches that I've seen, and I've talked to some of our potential partners that could come in the industry here in Mississippi, is whether the mills have considered getting together and getting into the residual market as a whole in a co-op type ideal setting. And it's very much more likely a small mill situation versus the big mills getting involved. Have you considered anything like that, where maybe you and some of your other partners across the state maybe considered investing in something themselves?
It's been talked about and looked into, and kind of at the end of the day, it's a problem for everybody, but it's a problem they don't really have the answers to, or their expertise is there. Majority of the time you just hear, I'm a sawmill guy. I don't have a clue about how to run a pellet plant. I don't have a clue about their market. We're all kind of just stay in our lane a little bit, but we're all sitting here having conversations of what can we do and who can we talk to figure out what to do with one of them, especially for where the situation we are. I feel like we're in the most fiber rich state in the country. And you've kind of got all these avenues at your disposal, whether it be residuals from mills in a bunch of areas or the roundwood. So it's especially now in our area, we thought with no competition, this may entice, as far as someone coming in, because they'll have the roundwood market and the residual market all to themselves, basically. So yeah, it's been conversations, but it's not been a lot of traction on that point to really come up with a resolution and come together on it.
And it may be that we have to do that. Necessity is the mother of all invention, and unfortunately, we're at that point. If we want to continue with some of our markets, we may have to consider that. And I've been to a lot of the mills. I haven't been to all of them in the state. I've been to a lot of mills and met with some great people and some very knowledgeable people. And I think that there's potential out there for something of that nature to happen. My last question is going to go back to where we started. The big mills did not get the extension. I believe the small mills got a bit of an extension. Is that right? Casey, did they get the extension on EDR regulations? Yeah. So what is your plan, Mr. Hankins, on the European Union? Because if you sell residuals into the market, they're probably going to eventually put you on the spot. Have you thought through that, or what's the small mills' perspective on these European regulations?
Yeah, it's not good for us as far as the mills are, the landowner as well. I think it's a lose for both parties, and it makes it difficult to do business and run your process of production with it being in place. It's going to be damaging to the industry.
Right. I don't know that there's an easy answer, so I appreciate you being here. Any other questions for Mr. Hankins? All right. Well, But I'm gonna let you go there. I do have a few parting words to say. As I started this conversation, there's no easy answer. We're not done with contracts and what's in there. Like I said, the carbon sphere is going to be the next area that needs to be discussed, and how that works. I do have a little more clarification, but a little less clarification. I feel like we're in the middle of a quite muddy mud puddle. That's just continued to be stirred, and I don't think there's a good answer there. From what I've heard on the EUDR regulations, is as long as your intent when you sign the contract and it's cut is to essentially reforest or not do anything as far as conversion, then they're going to buy it from you. And then the day after it's all cut, if you decide to change your mind, then you're going to be potentially able to convert it or sell it or whatever it may be. I do have some questions as to the standing contracts and the length of those contracts, and what eventually would happen with regard to property rights, for just for an attorney running the title search on it, who's going to be representing a party who's buying a piece of land. Is that going to run with the land or not? I think these are very hard questions that need to be addressed, and we need to get some answers on. I would love, Dino, I'd love for you and Mr. Pittman, I would love to see, the language that y'all are going to put in your contracts, so that we can maybe see whether there's any area we can help work on. At the end of the day, I think that this issue is not going to go away anytime in the near future, even though I would love to see a executive action happen that does handle this for us. We do not want to discourage investment in the state of Mississippi. With our basket of wood, we cannot discourage investment. We just fought a battle to be sure that we have a residual market in DRACs, in their long-term permits, and that was a successful fight. And it was clear at the end of the day that they were doing what they needed to do to continue pushing that effort forward to be here. I've been very fortunate to follow that pine tree from the state of Mississippi to a light switch in England. And I've seen it happen, and I've seen the company work. I think that we've got further investment to do in the residual markets, and it's the only way we're going to continue to push this product. For at the end of the day, Mississippians do build America through our timber. And I would appreciate all efforts to move that forward. We have some amazing industry partners here today. If you haven't seen them, the David Livingston and the Loggers, Ellery Jones with Lumber Manufacturers, and Casey Anderson with Forestry Association. These three people right here fight every day for the betterment of our industry in the state of Mississippi and across the nation. If you don't believe it, David stepped out 2 or 3 times to go take phone calls because he's trying his best to make sure the transport is in the best shape it can be. And every day he gets calls about problems with loggers that are having within counties. And we've had hearings on that. There are no easy answers. And there are problems, and there will always be problems. And unfortunately, it seems like the industry is getting hit left and right with every arrow people can throw at them to try to shut it down, which is not good for the state. It's not good for nature. It's not good for our world, because you're going to end up with the wildfire risk. You're going to end up with the continued destruction of some of our timber management areas. If you don't manage the timber, you're not going to have a successful product. You're not going to have success in nature. So I truly believe in this field that we're in. I truly believe that our number one management person out there is going to be the landowner. I mean, they want that timber. They want it to go and grow and be successful for the future. With that, I will offer it for any other questions, comments from any of the other land committee members while we're here. Anything else y'all want to? It's always a pleasure to serve as your chairman of forestry. I think we've had some great times and moved some great things this year, and I am encouraged to see what transpires out of this committee next year. We're not done working. This committee will continue to move forward. So with that, I appreciate everybody being here. Mr. Vice Chairman, for a motion? Rise and report. All in favor say aye. Aye. Deep stuff. Yeah, that's all carbon stuff right there.